Imagine waking up one morning to loud knocking on your door. You peek outside and you see police officers standing on your porch. Your heart literally jumps into your throat. Your mind immediately scrambles and you think, wait, is this because I never paid off that credit card? Millions of Americans share this exact same heart-racing fear. They genuinely believe they can be arrested simply for falling behind on their bills. But is that actually the case? Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to completely unpack the complex and honestly sometimes scary legal reality of debt in the United States.
So here's the ultimate question on everyone's mind, right? If you max out a credit card, or if you default on a personal loan, or maybe you have a mountain of medical bills, can the police actually show up and take you to jail? It's a fear that debt collectors sometimes, implicitly rely on, and it's absolutely a fear that keeps decent people awake at night.
The reality is, the answer to that question is not just a simple yes or no. The answer might actually surprise you. In this explainer, we're going to reveal a pretty surprising narrative twist in the U.S. legal system. We'll look at when you absolutely cannot be arrested, the very rare situations where you actually can, and the single biggest mistake people make that turns a standard debt problem into a total criminal nightmare. Stick with me because understanding this could literally protect your freedom.
All right, let's get into part 1, the truth about debt, and the difference between civil and criminal law. To really grasp this, we first have to understand what ordinary consumer debt actually is. We're talking about credit card balances, personal loans, medical bills, student loans, or those buy now, pay later apps we all use. Falling behind on these is a civil issue, and that operates in a completely different universe than criminal law. Just to put this into perspective, an estimated 77 million Americans have a debt that has been turned over to a private collection agency. 77 million. That is a massive chunk of the population. If simply owing money was a crime, well, a quarter of the country would be behind bars. Some of these debts are just a few dollars, but because it's so incredibly widespread, it's absolutely crucial that we understand the rules of the game here.
Notice how clearly the law separates the two legal systems operating side by side in our courtrooms. Over in civil law, a private party, like your bank, sues you. The worst-case scenario is just that you're found liable and get a monetary judgment against you. The burden of proof is relatively low, but here is the key. The government has absolutely no power to put you in jail here. Criminal law, on the other hand, is when the government prosecutes you for breaking a statute. If you're found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, the penalty involves a loss of liberty. That means jail or prison. Ordinary debt, it sits firmly on the civil side.
Moving on to part 2, what debt collectors can actually do. Because unpaid consumer debts are handled through those civil courts, there are very strict federal boundaries in place just to protect you from harassment. Let's look at what collectors are legally allowed to do to get their money back. They can call you, they can send you letters, they can report the unpaid debt to credit bureaus, and yeah, they can file a civil lawsuit. If they win that lawsuit, they might be able to garnish your wages or levy your bank account, depending on your state's laws. But look at the illegal actions. Debt collectors are strictly outlawed from pretending to be a lawyer, using obscene language to harass you, or threatening you with violence. No exceptions. So, the really crucial point here is exactly what the federal government says. Under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which was enforced by the CFPB, it is explicitly 100% illegal for a debt collector to threaten you with arrest. So we can definitively debunk that myth right now. A debt collector cannot just call the police and have you locked up for owing them money. They simply do not have that power. Which brings us to part 3, the contempt of court loophole. Now, here is where our narrative takes a bit of a pivot. While the debt itself won't get you arrested, ignoring the legal process surrounding that debt absolutely can. There is a hidden loophole that catches thousands of people completely off guard every single year. You see, formal debtors' prisons were abolished by Congress way back in 1833. They're a total relic of the past. You could not be locked in a cell just because your bank account is empty. However, private debt collectors empowered by the courts have found a legal trapdoor. It's basically a backdoor where a standard civil debt suddenly transforms into a criminal justice issue. Let's walk through how this legal trap is actually built. Step 1. A creditor sues you and gets a money judgment. Step 2, they send you a legal paper called a financial disclosure form, basically to see what assets you have. Step 3, if you ignore that form, the court issues an order to show cause, demanding you appear in court. Step 4, if you don't show up to that hearing, the judge holds you in contempt of court. And finally, Step 5, the judge issues an arrest warrant. Literally, a simple ignored form escalates entirely into a warrant for your arrest. Wild, right? This brings us to the core reality of the entire system. If the police arrest you at Step 5, You are not being arrested because you owe money to a credit card company. You're being arrested because you willfully disobeyed a judge's lawful order to appear in court or provide information. The crime is not being poor. The crime is ignoring the court.
To understand that this isn't just some abstract theory, let's look at the data. In 2014, in Maryland district courts alone, this exact systemic reality resulted in 1,615 body attachments. That's just the fancy legal term for these civil arrest warrants. Research from organizations like the ACLU notes that these trends absolutely devastate communities, and they disproportionately impact Black and Latino populations due to existing wealth gaps. People are literally going to jail because they either didn't receive the notice, didn't understand the dense legal paperwork, or honestly, were just too terrified to go to court.
All right, moving into part 4, when debt actually becomes criminal.
Now, aside from contempt of court, there are a few very specific, extremely rare exceptions where owing money is tied directly to criminal statutes right from the get-go. These are situations where you aren't just dealing with a civil disagreement anymore. These exceptions generally fall into 2 major categories: willfully avoiding child support and intentionally committing fraud, like, say, writing bad checks. When you cross into these territories, you cross the line from a civil dispute into a criminal offense, where prosecutors and police actively get involved.
Let's look at the specifics on this. Under federal law, if you willfully fail to pay court-ordered out-of-state child support and it exceeds $5,000 or is past due for over a year, it's actually a federal misdemeanor. If it exceeds $10,000 or is over 2 years late, it becomes a felony punishable by up to 2 years in prison. Similarly, if you intentionally write a check knowing you don't have the funds, meaning you are actively trying to defraud a merchant, states like Florida categorize this as a misdemeanor or a felony, just depending on the dollar amount. In these cases, it's the fraud and the threat to public welfare that brings the threat of jail time, definitely not your standard consumer borrowing.
So let's wrap this up with part 5, how to protect yourself. How do you ensure an unpaid bill doesn't trigger that legal trapdoor we talked about? The absolute most important takeaway from this entire explainer is this: do not, under any circumstances, ignore the court. If you receive a financial disclosure form, fill it out. Keep copies of everything. If you're ordered to appear in court, you absolutely must go. Check your mail carefully, because debt is often sold to third-party companies you might not even recognize. Staying in communication with the court and your creditors is the shield that prevents a civil money judgment from turning into a criminal contempt charge. We've seen that while you can't be arrested for just owing money, the system has certainly evolved. When an unpaid bill leads to a missed court date, and that missed court date leads to handcuffs, we really have to ask ourselves, are these contempt of court arrests just a de facto modern version of the debtor's prison? It's a hidden flaw in our legal system that catches thousands off guard. I highly encourage you to look deeper into your own state's debt collection laws, read your mail, and never, ever let a civil issue steal your freedom. Thanks for learning with us today.